Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this little guy right here. This is the Sencut Knives Sachse, or Sachse, or something along those lines. First off, though, before I go any further, I got to let you know this guy was sent to me by Sencut directly. As always, I sent him full disclaimer on my website, told him I'm going to talk about the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly. It might be a gem, might be junk. They did still send it along. Nonetheless, we do have to assume that this guy is the absolutely best quality-controlled one of these guys ever, and I'm doing my best not to let that affect the nature or the quality of my review. Next thing, let's do some size comparison real quick. And what we're going to find is this is actually not a small knife. We'll put it up right here against the Spyderco Ontario Rat number 2 against the Spyderco Delica. So what we see here is that, this is of reasonable size. Here the blade length is pretty up there. Here it is against the Spyderco PM2, wearing a fancy pair of pants at the moment. What we're to see here is in terms of sharpened blade length, actually a little longer than the PM2, although not by a huge margin. And here it is against another interesting piece. This is the Praxis, which in a lot of ways feels like maybe insofar as this knife has a design cue, the swedge on the top of the blade is that design cue. So, there you go. It's that feels like maybe a little bit of a spiritual successor sort of thing. And then here it is against the one of Civivi's kind of classics. This is the Civivi McKenna. Very interesting piece. So, anyways, there is that. Next thing, what the heck is Sencut? Well, Sencut is the budget brand from We Knives budget brand, which is Civivi. This is Sencut. This is their whole new level. It is kind of an Amazon first company, although I'm nice to see. I'm glad to see that they are doing some work with some of their classical retailers. But all of these things are based out of We Knives, and though that is a Chinese company, they have actually done some really amazing work in the past. That is We Knives, and then through their budget brand Civivi, and then Sencut has risen recently, and they've done some stuff that was pretty uninteresting, but this is actually kind of interesting. So that's what we got going on here. And then the Sachse, I can only find reference under that name to this knife and a town in Texas. I have no idea where they pulled this out of. Maybe this is a Chinese thing that I'm not aware of. I have no clue. But either way, that's what this is called. And so let's go ahead and jump into the good and the not so good about this little knife right here. So on the good side to start with, this does have a recessed button. This is a little detail, but what we see here is that there is actually a little area where the scale is kind of cut away around the button, such that the button is not sticking all the way up and out. This is really important because it means that there is no way for this knife to accidentally come open by a flat object pressing against it, right? While I press this down firmly against the table, the detent is still in full force. This took me a little while to figure out. They made a couple of models without that were, but it's very good to see that they picked up on that, right? That is a crucial thing that they need to do, and it's nice to see it here. Next thing, price-wise, this is $47. This is actually a very solid price, right? This is a solid budget knife. In 2022, everything's getting expensive, but this is at a price where it's pretty reasonable. And the thing is, it is 100%, no matter what you want to say about it, it is a very safe knife. You can be pretty sure that this is not going to injure you. There are so many very cheap knives that are outright dangerous. This is not that, right? It's also not maybe very cheap, right? $50 is still a good chunk of change, but it's worth distinguishing that there is a level of knife that you can get which is much cheaper, but very often you start to compromise really important things like steel or like safety or those kinds of things. So I think this is towards the low end of what a good knife costs, and so I appreciate very much that. Next thing, this guy has a hidden lanyard post. There's a lanyard post right there, and that is kind of hidden, right? You can't see it when you're normally carrying the knife, and that's a beautiful thing. As opposed to kind of the lazy lanyard hole where it's just like drilled through there. I appreciate very much that they have hidden that lanyard post away. That way it's there if you need it, but it's not there if you don't care. And more specifically, you have these little you have the standoffs to either side here, which allow the lanyard to never touch the blade, because it will either go up to here or up to here, but it'll never be able to get down to where the blade is. That's nice. Next thing, this has a reasonable clip on it. The clip itself, you can see that the clip does sit up above the scale, but the clip has countersunk screws. The screws are kind of down there, sunken in there, and it looks like you could actually swap it to the other side. Making this, by the way, and it is a deep carry clip, so it is carried at this level in the pocket, which means you really aren't seeing much of this knife in the pocket. But the reversibility of the clip, coupled with the fact that it is a button lock, which is very very easy to actuate with your index finger or your thumb, depending on the hand you're using, as well as double-sided thumb studs, as well as a flipper tab that's right in the middle. This is pretty much a fully ambidextrous knife. It's not exactly the same experience as a lefty because you use your index finger instead of your thumb there, but it is a very, very good experience, I gather, for either hand. That's a beautiful thing. Next thing, this is using a micarta. They do have G10 versions. That's fine, too. And this micarta is fine. This is very much on the clothy micarta side of things, rather than being like a super high-end, oh my god, micarta. But you know what? It works. It's fine. It's good to go. And it's nice to see because you get a little bit of texture from that. No problem there. Next thing, this knife has 3 different possibilities for opening it. First off, you do have the thumb stud here, and I bet you could probably get these thumb studs off, and somebody mentioned that actually on their Amazon site, so, I would assume that's a thing. You can also use the flipper tab in the back here, which you could probably grind off too if you hated it. But nonetheless, so you can thumb stud it open, you can flipper it open. And on this particular guy, potentially problematically, you can actually just press down on the button lock and the knife itself will fall open, making this you can basically treat this as a gravity knife sort of thing, where you just use centripetal force to open it up. So there is that. And it's kind of nice, though, that you got those different options there. That makes it a little bit easier. If you're not a big flipper guy, use the studs. If you're not a particularly thumb stud sort of gal, use the flipper. No problem, right? Easy peasy. So that's good. And then finally on the good side, this has a fine little blade to it. Right, here is your blade. And what we see here is it is relatively tall. And the stock on it is not particularly thick. And so as a result, it comes down to a very nice thin edge. That is a beautiful thing. This knife actually cuts a lot better than the knives you're going to see out and about. The steel on this guy is, can we see the label here? Probably not. I think it's very carefully hidden, but you saw it during the assembly. This is a 9CR 18 MOV. This is a steel that I'm not excited about at high cost, but at $50, you know what? Okay, right? Okay, sure, whatever. It's not that pricey, but you're going to sharpen it a fair amount, but it works, right? And so, to me, the fact that this is a nice thin blade, where it comes down to a nice thin edge and a nice thin tip, that's a beautiful thing. And then, combined with a decent steel for a budget knife, as well as a full sharpening choil that is done properly such that the entire edge comes all the way to the end, that's pretty good. And so to me, the very best part about this knife is 100% that blade, which does really nicely for cutting and comes to a nice thin edge. It also does have that little swedge along the top, which adds a little bit of something to it. But nonetheless, to me, all of that is the good, is that it is a fine blade, a choice of opening methods, fine micarta, fully ambidextrous with a reasonable clip, a hidden lanyard post. It is $47, which ain't so bad, and it has a recessed button. On the bad side, couple of little things. One off, you got to feel that there's a little lock stick on here. I'm going to be honest, on a button lock, a little lock stick isn't that concerning at the level it's at. It kind of almost adds as a little bit of an assurance and a tactility to it. So, whatever. It's not the end of the world. But if this got potentially worse, it would end up being problematic. Next thing, you do have to be careful with your gravity knife and automatic knife laws. Depending, and talk to a lawyer, not a YouTuber. This is not legal advice. But in many places, if you are able to interact with something other than the blade to open the knife, that actually could make it an automatic knife or a gravity knife, where you're able to use the force of gravity to deploy the blade. That's not something that is generally super enforced, is my understanding. Again, talk to your lawyer, not a jackass on the internet. But at the same time, that is a thing you're going to want to consider, right? So do keep that in mind. There are other designs that are button locks that actually have a secondary detent that prevent the blade from coming open when you just press the button and provide some bias towards closure. So that's not a thing here. Whatever, not a big deal. Next thing, ergonomics on this guy are actually by and large okay. Like, the clip doesn't feel great in the hand, but it's by and large okay. But it does have the issue of the clip curves back, and the flipper tab, that is, curves back. And that's almost never a nice thing, right? And especially as I choke up against this, I end up feeling it right up against my finger with the relatively sharp jimping, which is, by the way, good. I mean, that's a good utility sort of thing, but it does end up feeling pretty uncomfortable, and I'm not a big fan of that. So the ergos on this are okay, but the flipper tab thing is not amazing. And then finally on the bad side, and in my estimation, the worst thing that this knife has wrong with it, is that the design is very intensely, deeply boring, right? It is very middle of the road. We in Civivi used to work with designers to do interesting things, right? This is the Elijah Isham McKenna. I mean, you get things like, come on, the Eschaton. This is the same company that did this. This given is completely ridiculous and not particularly budget friendly, but still, this is so incredibly uninteresting as a design, right? It's not a bad design. It's not that I'm saying this is an awful. It's just like every knife averaged. It is a knife-shaped object. I feel like if I trained an AI to generate knives, it would generate a million things that look roughly like this. So it is a very middle-of-the-road design. It is hotel artwork, and that's not a thing that appeals to me. But it's not necessarily a huge demerit on the knife, because you know what? Knives are shaped this way because that's a fine way for knives to be shaped. So it is completely without any sort of artistic interest or design to me, in my estimation, but you know what? That's very personal, and that may not matter at all to you. So, to me, all of that is the bad. The design is incredibly middle of the road. The ergos are okay, except for the flipper tab. Be careful with your gravity knife laws, and there is a little bit of stick on here, but it's not the end of the world. Final conclusion, you know what? This is a pretty solid little knife, right? Because it has a safe recessed button lock, a budget-friendly price, a hidden lanyard post in there. It has a reasonable clip, full ambidextrous action, reasonable micarta, a choice of opening methods, and a very, very nice little blade here. The button-based deployment could run afoul of some local laws and has a little bit of stiction to it. Flipper tab isn't great ergonomically, and the whole thing is a little bit And then the knife design is just kind of wildly boring, but on the whole, this is pretty solid. It is, as I said, decidedly, and I am saying this as much to declare my bias as I am as a commentary on the knife, this is decidedly in the hotel artwork school of knife design. This has been a thing that I have seen becoming more and more of a trend in 2021, 2022. A lot of companies, particularly Chinese OEMs, but a lot of folks are guilty of this, are just creating a bunch of generic knives, right? Okay, look, I'm going to cover this up right here. If I were to ask you to sketch this knife right now, what would you draw? What would you point out as being the unique thing about this knife? Honestly, I suspect that many of you couldn't. And I don't think that I could draw this knife. The thing that is kind of a design touch that I remember is the swedge on the blade. That's really about it. Everything else is incredibly, incredibly generic, right? You would draw a button lock, you would draw a thumb stud, a flipper tab, a handle that's basically shaped like a knife handle, a blade that's basically shaped like a knife blade. It is there's nothing really notable here. It is, again, a solid and practical design, but compared to many other knives, even Biwi and Civivi, this feels like the average of knife across many instances rather than something artful and exceptional. It is the average budget knife, and it brings very little new to the table in terms of design. And it makes me long for the days where we had folks like Elijah Isham collaborating there, or even the budget kind of things like this is an artisan cutlery knife with Dirk Pinkerton that is very, very much its own thing, right? There was a lot of difference out there, and now this kind of samey stuff is getting really old, right? And especially when it's coming out in huge quantities over and over and over again, no wonder they're using random Texas city names for knives. They probably ran out of names that are actually, I don't know. So I'll be honest, that thing drives me a little bit crazy. And when I see a knife like this where it's yes, that's a knife-shaped object, even when it is good, it bothers me. And I came into this review very much primed to dislike this. In some ways, I will freely admit, I came into this thinking to myself, oh man, I kind of want to tear this a new one, right? But I have to admit, the knife is actually quite good, right? There were a number of good elements here. There were relatively few bad ones, and the biggest thing that annoys me because I'm a snob. Let's be real here. I am kind of a knife design snob, and so the things that bother me here aren't really bad. They're just things that bother me. And so, considering this has a bunch of good elements, very few bad ones, and the price is a pretty solid value, even with my inherent bias here, my intense dislike of cookie-cutter designs, I have to say, this is a good knife. Frankly, this is even a gem. I don't know that I would ever carry it myself, right? But I will absolutely keep it around as a great budget option because I think it is one. And it is a very easy knife to recommend because, as I've said, it is safe, it is utilitarian, it has a good blade, it has, there is a lot to like about this guy. And so if somebody comes to me and says, Nick, I don't want art, I don't need high design, I don't need fancy, I just want a knife that I can put in my pocket and it will cut all day long, and then I put it back in the pocket and it's fine. This is a pretty solid choice at this kind of price point. Certainly at higher price points, I might send people towards things that clear their orbit a little bit better. And one of my big fears of doing reviews on anything from the Wii's low end is that they're just going to like discontinue it in 20 minutes anyways. And next week we'll have something else named after the next Texas town, right? I don't know, but I like this. I think this is, well, okay, hold on. I respect this. I think this is a solid knife. I don't like it necessarily, but I think it's a good knife. And so even if I can't pronounce it, I probably couldn't draw it, I can absolutely recommend it. And so if you're looking for a solid little budget knife that will do exactly what you need it to, that will be safe, that will be reasonable, and won't break the bank, then you know what? This little guy might be a pretty sexy option for you. Okay, anyways, there you go. Hope this has been interesting to you, and have yourselves an absolutely wonderful rest of the day. And Sencut, I gotta say, good job, but maybe some design collabs, just saying. Anyways, good job, though, mostly. Keep up the good work. Yeah. Anyways, have a good one, everybody. Bye now.